The airplane door had just closed when a trembling voice came over the intercom. "Captain Peterson, we need you in the cabin immediately." That sound sliced through the calm like a blade. 170. 3 heads lifted from their phones, glowing screens dimming. Something was wrong. Very wrong. In the narrow aisle, Ethan Wallace remained motionless. 12 minutes had passed. He had not moved, not replied, not compromised. Not when the gate agent asked if he could truly afford a first-class seat. Not when Robert Finch, a young flight attendant with a voice heavy with counterfeit authority, insisted his ticket might simply be a system error. Ethan did not budge. His hand clenched the crumpled boarding pass, thumb brushing the platinum crest embossed on the leather case at his feet. Whispers swept through the cabin like wind across tall grass. Phones lifted. Cameras began to record. Everyone understood. When a black man is detained in first class, it is never just a routine check. "Sir, you're holding up the flight," Robert said, forcing his voice steady, though the final syllable shook. "Please step aside so we can verify." Ethan lifted his gaze. His eyes were still, like a lake hiding the storm beneath. A message buzzed in his jacket pocket. He opened his phone. On the screen, 3 words appeared. "Everything is ready." All it required was his command. Olivia Barnes, a flight attendant with 8 years of seniority, stepped forward. Her face was taut, her smile frozen in place. In her mind, she clung to the first-class standard she had always upheld. The man before her, simple shirt, no diamond rings, no ostentation, looked nothing like the customers she was accustomed to serving. "Sir, I'll need further identification," Olivia said, her tone clipped as if read from a manual. "According to policy, any irregularity must be checked." "What irregularity?" Ethan asked, his voice low and steady. Olivia glanced quickly at Robert, then at Mark, another attendant nearby. Mark nodded subtly, signaling agreement, then muttered with implication, "The name matches, yes. But strange." Ethan withdrew his wallet, laying 3 items in Olivia's hand. A driver's license, an American Express Centurion card, and a Skyline Air Platinum Elite membership card. Each glinted beneath the fluorescent light. The names aligned. Every detail was flawless. Yet Olivia scrutinized them longer than necessary, as if she were a forensic examiner searching for invisible cracks. "We've seen scams before. We must be cautious, especially with seats this expensive." Her voice rose just enough for nearby passengers to hear. Charles Whitman, a white businessman in a tailored suit, stepped out from seat 1C. "What's the holdup? I have a meeting at 5. If there's an issue, move him back to coach and sort it out there. We pay for priority service after all." A dismissive glance, a judgment dusted off with ease. Ethan's tone stayed calm. "I have shown every document. I have a first-class ticket. What more do you need?" Robert moved closer, his shoulders squared to block the aisle. "Please, sir, the company's policy is clear in situations like this." "Situations like what?" Ethan pressed, eyes sweeping across each of them. No one answered. Only silence, heavy and awkward, as though their excuses had been stripped bare. Olivia bent toward her tablet, feigning review. Mark coughed into his fist. Dissatisfaction rose in the cabin. Murmurs blended with the click of recording phones. The air thickened. Charles Whitman spoke again, this time with sharpened authority. "Enough! Put him in coach, then handle the rest. We have schedules to keep." Ethan answered with only one sentence. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "I hold seat 2A. I will sit in seat 2A. I will not surrender it to anyone." Olivia's frozen smile fractured. Robert glanced at his watch. Mark's jaw tightened, and in that instant, a truth seeped through the cabin. The man they tried to push aside was not afraid. He stood firm, solid as stone in a rushing river. For Ethan Wallace, the words "I'm not going" were not mere defiance. They were the vow of a lifetime. In boardrooms worth billions, when he said no concessions, entire corporations were forced to change direction. And now, in the narrow aisle of a Boeing 737, those words once again became arrows fired straight at the fortress of arrogance. At that moment, no one on board knew. The man branded suspicious was the one holding the power to make the entire airline tremble. And it was his unshakable silence that signaled the real storm had only just begun. The cabin was taut and silent, like the still surface of water before a storm. Then the cockpit door swung open. Captain Alan Peterson stepped out, his footsteps striking the floor with the weight of a hammer. 50, 6 years old, salt and pepper hair slicked back, the seasoned gaze of a man who had lived with the sky for over 20,000 flight hours. He believed he could read any kind of passenger. But today, that belief was about to shatter. "I hear there is a disruptive passenger." Peterson's voice carried, deep and heavy, like a judgment across the cabin. Olivia hurried forward, words spilling from her mouth, each one stabbing at Ethan's image. He refused to cooperate, refused to move, argued repeatedly when we asked for additional verification. Robert nodded, adding fuel. "He's delaying the flight, making other passengers uncomfortable." Peterson listened, his face as cold as stone. He turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Wallace, correct? I am Captain Peterson. I understand you're having some difficulty with my crew." Ethan stood tall, his gaze calm as the deep sea. "No, Captain. I'm not having difficulty. I'm sitting in my assigned seat, with a first-class ticket and valid identification. The difficulty lies in your crew's refusal to accept that." Even the whistle of air seeping through the cabin door seemed to hush. A few passengers held their breath. Peterson frowned. "Listen, on this aircraft, safety and security are absolute. If the crew asks you to provide further verification, you must comply. That's policy." "I have already provided full documentation," Ethan replied. "What more do you require?" "It's not for you to decide." Peterson cut him off, his voice as rigid as steel. "This is my aircraft. Any regulation I enforce is for the protection of passengers." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. A few passengers scoffed, recognizing the hollow excuse. A young woman, Jasmine Lee, raised her phone higher, her lens capturing every detail. Ethan kept his eyes locked on the captain. "Then tell me, what is it about me that makes you feel unsafe?" Peterson faltered for a beat, then narrowed his eyes. "You refused to cooperate. That is the concern. A flimsy answer, swallowed by mocking laughter from passengers behind. Tension thickened like a drumbeat. Ethan calmly unlocked his phone. His finger moved to a contact marked in red. Executive office. "What are you doing?" Peterson demanded, his voice rising. "Making a call," Ethan answered, steady. "You cannot use electronic devices while the aircraft is still at the gate. FCC regulations." Peterson fired back, clinging to the thinnest of reasons. Laughter spilled from the rows behind. Someone whispered, "That's absurd." Ethan lifted his head, his gaze sharp as ice. "You're truly citing phone restrictions to stop me from making a call while we're still at the gate?" Peterson's face flushed red, his fist tightening. "I'm ordering you to comply. This is your final warning." "Final. If you don't step aside, I will have you removed from this aircraft." The words dropped into the cabin like stones into a well. Every eye turned to Ethan. He did not stand. He did not move. He only spoke 3 words, each one cutting like a blade. "I am not." Peterson checked his watch. The flight was now 12 minutes late. Hundreds of passengers' eyes burned like fire at his back. Pressure from the airline, from time, from his own pride, pressed heavily on his shoulders. "Mr. Wallace," Peterson lowered his voice, but each word struck like a hammer. "I order you. Leave this plane. Immediately." "On what grounds?" Ethan asked. "Failure to comply. Disruptive behavior. Your choice." Ethan held his gaze, the edge of a smile forming. In that moment, he was not simply a passenger being insulted. He was a commander who had lived on the chessboard of power. He recognized the moment had come, the breaking point where only one question mattered. Who would blink first? He did not blink. Ethan's voice rang across the cabin, as forceful as a gavel cracking the silence. "Captain Peterson, let us be clear. You are ordering me off this plane not because I broke regulations, not because I threatened safety, but only because your crew is uncomfortable for seeing a black man in a first-class seat, and you are choosing to defend their discomfort instead of justice." His words struck like lightning, tearing apart the false facade. The cabin erupted. Some passengers bowed their heads in shame. Others nodded in agreement. Jasmine stepped closer, camera fixed on the scene. Peterson's face drained, his voice breaking into a shout. "You are slandering me! You will be removed from this flight for disrupting security!" But at that very moment, the authority he thought he commanded began to slip through his fingers. The murmurs inside the cabin fell silent when 2 figures in blue uniforms appeared at the aircraft door. Airport security. Broad-shouldered, heavy steps, eyes trained from years of handling drunks and troublemakers. But when they saw the man seated calmly in 2A, an elegant briefcase at his feet, shirt crisp and pressed, they hesitated. This was not a troublemaker. This was a successful businessman, impossibly composed amid an atmosphere ready to explode. "What's going on here?" one officer asked, his voice low and steady. Peterson seized the chance, pointing at Ethan. "This passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions. He is obstructing, disrupting the flight." The officer's eyes rested on Ethan for several seconds. "Sir, what do you have to say to this?" Ethan tilted his head, his voice warm and steady, almost unsettlingly calm. I have a first-class ticket, seat 2A. I have presented all valid documents. I have not raised my voice, insulted anyone, or threatened anyone. I have only refused to leave my rightful seat." One officer frowned. "Then why were you asked to leave?" Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes flicking toward Peterson. "That is a good question. Perhaps the captain can answer it." The cabin went silent. Dozens of phone cameras lifted higher. Jasmine Lee was now on her feet, her camera shaking but unwavering. She knew this moment would become evidence. Peterson's face turned crimson. He stammered. He refused to cooperate with additional procedures. That is, policy. "Additional procedures?" the officer pressed. "Identity verification." "But he has already presented identification. I saw he has an airline membership card, a premium credit card. What more is needed?" Olivia lowered her head, pretending to fiddle with her tablet. Robert stepped back, his throat tight. No one dared add another word. The silence roared. Passengers began pulling out phones, cameras flashing. Even Charles Whitman, the businessman who earlier demanded Ethan be sent back, now held up his phone. He muttered loudly enough for Rose nearby to hear. "My God, they're trying to throw him out just because he's black." Peterson whipped around, his voice rising. "No, this has nothing to do with race." But the very denial only sharpened what he was trying to hide. Ethan remained seated, his hands folded neatly in his lap, eyes steady and bright like a beacon in a storm. He did not need to shout. His silence, in stark contrast to the chaos around him, was its own weapon. Then Jasmine's voice cut through the cabin, clear and unwavering. "My name is Jasmine Lee. I have recorded everything from the beginning. This man has done nothing wrong. He has been polite, patient. The only thing he has done is sit in his first-class seat." Her words struck like a spark in a powder keg. The cabin erupted in whispers and gasps. More phones were raised, red recording lights flashing. "Put that phone away," Peterson snapped. "This is a public space," Jasmine shot back. "I have the right to document the truth. And the truth is, he is being treated differently." The two officers exchanged a look, their expressions shifting from routine to grave. They knew this moment could leave the cabin and explode online within minutes. Peterson felt control slipping through his fingers. He turned to Ethan, his voice hard but strained. "I warn you one last time. If you do not leave this aircraft, I will call for backup, and you will be dragged out in front of everyone." Ethan lifted his head, his voice low and resonant like a bell tolling. "And if you do that, within an hour, Skyline Air will be at the center of a crisis. Stock will plummet. Headlines will flood the news. Congress will demand answers. Are you certain you want to go that far, just to force me out of a first-class seat?" The words cut through the air like a blade of ice. Peterson froze. The passengers held their breath. The officers remained motionless. Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes locked, unshaken. "The choice is yours. But remember this, I am not leaving." The weight of silence pressed down on every soul in the cabin. Then suddenly, the crackle of the intercom filled the air. "Attention passengers and crew. This is Linda Morales, Executive Vice President of Skyline Air. We are monitoring this situation through the surveillance system. Captain Peterson, You are to immediately cease any procedure to remove this passenger from the aircraft." The cabin erupted with gasps. Peterson turned to stone. Olivia went pale. Robert stumbled back, his pulse racing, and Ethan, for the first time since boarding, allowed himself the faintest smile. The cabin fell into silence after the shattering announcement from the intercom. Only the pounding heartbeat of those involved echoed in their ears. Peterson's face turned pale, his lips pressed tight, the weary eyes of a man who had flown for over 20 years, now trembling with panic. For the first time in his career, the captain felt he no longer held command. The glow of passengers' phones lit up his figure like judgmental spotlights, leaving him nowhere to hide. "Captain Peterson," the woman's voice on the intercom rang out again, sharp as steel. "You will leave the cockpit immediately to report to management at the gate. Flight 447 is delayed until this matter is resolved." The final order shattered every illusion. Peterson stood frozen like a statue. Passengers held their breath, waiting. Ethan slowly rose from seat 2A. Not hurried, not explosive, every movement carried weight, as if he were rewriting each line of the script for the performance ahead. He slipped a slim leather wallet from his jacket. As it opened, the cabin lights reflected off a metal card engraved with the words, "Skyline Air, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer." The cabin erupted. Olivia dropped her tablet, the sharp crack of plastic against the floor ringing through the air. Robert staggered back, hitting the wall with a thud, his mouth gaping as if the breath had been stolen from him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's voice carried clear and steady across the cabin. "My name is Ethan Wallace, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Skyline Air. And just now, I experienced what thousands of passengers endure every day: discrimination, suspicion, and humiliation, simply because I am a black man sitting in first class." Each word landed like a blade striking the table. The passengers froze. Many nodded, their eyes glinting with recognition. Charles Whitman, the man who had first dismissed him, now lowered his head, phone still recording, but his face flushed red with shame. Jasmine stepped closer, her camera trembling as she captured the moment she knew would spread worldwide. Ethan turned to Peterson, his voice calm, yet laced with the chill of authority. "In the last 15 minutes, you and your crew tried to remove the very owner of this aircraft. Do you understand the consequences of that?" Peterson stammered, his lips dry and cracked. I didn't know. I never. Exactly. You didn't know, and that is the problem." Ethan's voice struck like a hammer. "You didn't care who I was or what I had done. You only saw a black man in first class, and that alone was enough for you to decide I did not belong here." The cabin was deathly still. Every passenger's eyes locked on Peterson, as though watching a man bury his own career. Ethan drew a steady breath, then turned to Olivia and Robert. "The same goes for both of you. Or you created a hostile environment, sowed baseless suspicion, and humiliated a paying customer. You are suspended from duty, effective immediately." Olivia broke down in sobs, her voice cracking. "Please, I have a family. Ethan did not raise his voice, but his eyes were resolute and unwavering. "You should have thought about your family before you decided skin color mattered more than a boarding pass." Robert stood speechless, his face ashen, his trembling hands clutching a pen as though it might anchor him. He knew excuses were meaningless now. 2 skyline managers in uniform appeared at the cabin door, their faces tense, their movements efficient. "Captain Peterson, please come with us. Olivia Barnes and Robert Finch prepare to leave the flight for investigation." Peterson stiffened, then staggered forward, each step heavy as stone. Passengers watched, some shaking their heads. Olivia and Robert quietly gathered their things, Olivia's sobs muffled by the hum of the intercom. Ethan sat back down in seat 2A, his breath slow and steady. For the first time since boarding, no one dared to question whether he belonged there. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers regarded him with respect, mixed with unease. Charles moved closer, his voice trembling. "Mr. Wallace, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to think." Ethan nodded, his voice even. "What matters is not the mistake, but that you recognize it." Jasmine kept filming, her eyes shining. She knew this story would not end in the first-class cabin. It would ignite a fire far beyond the skies tonight. The intercom sounded again, this time softer. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your new captain, Jennifer Walsh. We sincerely apologize for the incident. The flight to New York will depart in just a few minutes." As the engines roared to life, preparing for taxi, Ethan leaned back, eyes closing. He knew the battle had only just begun. The engines roared as the plane rolled out onto the runway. Outside the window, city lights blurred through a thin veil of rain. Inside the cabin, silence hung heavy. Everyone had just witnessed a reversal of power. A CEO treated as an intruder on his own property, and within minutes, the balance of authority had shifted entirely. Ethan sat upright in seat 2A. His hands rested on his lap, his eyes half closed, but his mind turned like a storm. Every image still echoed: the suspicious glances, the sharp commands, the muffled laughter mixed with awkward silence. He had seen this before in boardrooms, when rivals tried to push him out of negotiations. But this time was different. This was not a deal. This was dignity. A soft ding signaled the intercom. A warm female voice came through. "Mr. Wallace, this is Linda Morales from the executive office. I want you to know that the entire incident has been recorded and is being transmitted directly to the board of directors. When you arrive in New York, we will convene an emergency meeting to implement disciplinary actions and necessary reforms." Ethan pressed the microphone button beside his seat. His voice rang out, clear for every passenger to hear. "Thank you, Ms. Morales. But remember, this is not just an incident. It is a symptom of a disease. If we do not address the root, it will repeat. And next time, the victim may not be me, but an ordinary passenger with no power and no voice." Applause rose from the back rows, first scattered, then spreading like a wave of heavy, shared recognition. Many phones lifted higher, recording his words. An hour later, as the plane leveled in the night sky, Ethan opened his laptop. The glow lit his thoughtful face as he began to type. Not a routine report, not polite correspondence. It was an urgent memorandum to Skyline Air's entire leadership. All crew members involved in discriminatory behavior are to be suspended immediately. Within 60 days, every frontline employee must undergo training on bias and fairness. An advocacy team will be established, tasked with handling passenger complaints on the spot. An internal monitoring system will be enforced to ensure every interaction is transparent. Each line he typed cut deep into a sickness that had festered too long. A new attendant, young and nervous, approached cautiously. "Mr. Wallace, may I get you anything? A drink? Dinner?" Ethan looked up, meeting hesitant eyes. It was no longer suspicion. It was respect, laced with fear. He nodded. "Water will be enough. And remember, service is not about pleasing. Service is about respect." The young woman froze, then bowed her head. "Yes, sir." In the rear cabin, whispers swirled. Charles Whitman quickly deleted the furious post he had written about a passenger delaying the flight. Embarrassed, he tucked his phone away, his face flushed red. Jasmine Lee was different. She kept her camera rolling, whispering with fervor, "I just witnessed a moment that will change history." Every frame she captured became evidence, a weapon of truth the world would soon see. 2 hours later, the plane touched down at LaGuardia. The seatbelt sign went dark, but no one rushed to leave. All waited to see what would happen next. The door opened. 2 senior Skyline managers stepped aboard, uniforms crisp, faces tense. They walked directly to first class, bowed and said, "Mr. Wallace, we have been instructed to escort you to an emergency meeting. Captain Walsh will continue command of this flight." Ethan rose. The cabin held its breath. He looked around once, his voice resonant. "Today, you did not just witness a passenger treated unjustly. You witnessed a system that must change. And I promise, from this moment forward, Skyline Air will change." A thunderous applause erupted, not because he was CEO, but because he voiced what they had long yearned to hear. Ethan walked forward, his stride steady. Yellow cabin lights cast his shadow long across the aisle. Tonight, he was not just the leader of an airline. He was the symbol of silent resistance, turning humiliation into the spark of reform. In his mind, he knew one truth with certainty. This was only the beginning. The emergency meeting room at LaGuardia was packed, the cold fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over tense faces. The long wooden table was cluttered with files, reports, and phones already set to record. The atmosphere was heavier than the delayed cabin just hours earlier. Ethan Wallace entered, tall and composed, his face calm, but his eyes burning bright. He did not need to pound the table to command attention. The silence of the room was already the heaviest greeting. At the head of the table, Captain Alan Peterson slumped in his seat. His navy blue uniform, once a symbol of authority, now wrinkled and soaked with sweat. Beside him sat Olivia Barnes, eyes swollen red, and Robert Finch, lips pressed so tightly they looked ready to bleed. Across from them sat regional directors, the head of human resources, and company attorneys. Michael Brooks, the regional director, spoke first, his voice heavy as lead. "In 28 years with this airline, I have never seen an incident recorded and spread this fast. Within 1 hour, the video has over 200,000 views, and all the evidence points to one truth. The fault lies with our crew." Peterson shot up, voice cracking. "I only followed procedure. The passenger refused to cooperate. I had to act. I didn't know he was the CEO." Ethan leaned forward, his voice ringing out, every word falling like a hammer. Captain Peterson, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is you didn't care to know. You saw my skin color and rushed to conclude that I didn't belong in first class. Olivia burst into tears, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Please forgive me, I didn't mean to. I was only acting out of habit, I thought. Thought what? Ethan cut her off, his tone sharp, though never raised. That a black man in a plain shirt could not afford seat 2A. That your scrutinizing stare was procedure. Call it what it is. Bias. Robert stayed silent, his eyes lost in the void. Ethan turned his gaze on him. And you? You said I was delaying the flight, inconveniencing others. In truth, you just wanted me out of sight so things could return to normal. But that normal was injustice. No one answered. Only the sound of a lawyer's pen tapping, capturing every word, every fault. Margaret Foster, head of HR, flipped through a file. Her voice was cold. Captain Peterson, in the past 18 months, your record shows 3 incidents involving black passengers. This time, it is no longer rumor. It has been recorded. We will report your violation of industry fairness standards to the FAA. The suspension of your license is almost certain. Peterson collapsed inward, like a kite with its string cut. 30 years of career vanished in 15 minutes of error. Olivia and Robert bowed their heads, their hands trembling. Margaret turned to them. Both of you are suspended indefinitely, pending investigation. But with video evidence and dozens of passenger statements, I fear your careers in this industry are over. The sound of muffled sobs filled the room. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He did not feel triumph. This was not a personal victory, but proof of a systemic illness. He opened them again, his voice slow yet resonant. I am not here to destroy careers, but I will not allow my passengers, any passenger, to suffer the same humiliation I did today. Skyline Air will change, and that change begins with accountability. Michael Brooks nodded firmly, his eyes resolute. Mr. Wallace, the board is ready. We await your directive. Ethan placed his hand on the table, his voice sharp and commanding. First, every crew member must complete bias training within 60 days, no exceptions. Second, we will establish an immediate hotline for passengers to report discrimination. Every report will be logged and transparent. Third, any act of discrimination, no matter how small, will result in immediate termination. Each declaration struck the table like a gavel, forcing every back in the room to straighten. Peterson tried to speak once more, but only a whisper escaped. Mr. Wallace, please, I've dedicated my life to this airline. Ethan's gaze was steady, cold, but not cruel. Dedication does not erase prejudice. A skilled pilot may fly through storms, but a man carrying bias will sink an entire airline. You chose wrong, and the price is your career. Peterson bowed his head, tears falling onto the report before him. The room was thick with silence. Then Ethan rose, closed his laptop, and his voice cut through like the close of a trial. Today, justice was carried out in one room. Tomorrow, it must exist on every flight. I will not stop until Skyline Air becomes the airline of fairness. Everyone stood, not out of formality, but because they felt the fire in his voice. Beyond the glass window, the lights of New York shimmered, reflecting the silhouette of Ethan Wallace, not just a CEO, but a man leading a quiet revolution, beginning from seat 2A and spreading across the skies. The next morning, Skyline Air's headquarters in Manhattan was in turmoil. Hallways buzzed with ringing phones, television cameras crowded the main lobby, and the airline's silver-blue logo filled every news screen. Headlines blared, "The 2A moment shakes the airline industry." Skyline Air faces unprecedented crisis. But Ethan Wallace did not hide. He chose to step into the light. The press room blazed with flashes. Hundreds of reporters jostled, microphones thrust forward. Ethan appeared, moving with calm assurance, his face composed but his eyes blazing. A perfectly tailored black suit, a deep navy tie against a crisp white shirt, not to flaunt, but to deliver a message. True leadership was here. He placed his hand on the podium, his voice resonant and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here to tell a personal story. I am here to lay bare a truth. Yesterday, I was doubted, stopped, and nearly dragged out of a first-class seat. Not because I lacked a ticket, not because I violated any rules, but because I was a black man, sitting where many believed I did not belong." The room held its breath. Camera lenses snapped, recorders glowed red. Ethan pressed on, his voice rising with force. "But I was fortunate. I had power. I had a voice. I could stop this injustice for myself. The problem is, millions of other passengers do not, and they, every day, are pushed from their seats, doubted, humiliated, simply because of bias." His words cracked through the silence like thunder. Pens scratched furiously, whispers rose, then quickly died. Ethan lifted the memo, the same document he had written on the plane the night before. "Starting today, Skyline Air will implement reforms like never before." He read each point clearly, his voice striking like a drumbeat. Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, from flight attendants and ground staff to senior management within 60 days. A passenger advocacy division operating 24/7 to address discrimination complaints immediately. Transparent monitoring systems in cabins with records stored as evidence for any incident. A zero-tolerance policy. Anyone found guilty of discrimination, even in the smallest act, will be terminated at once. The clatter of keyboards filled the room. A reporter from the New York Times called out, "Mr. Wallace, do you think these measures will increase operating costs?" Ethan looked straight into the lens, his eyes sharp as steel. "The real cost is silence. We have already paid in dignity, in reputation, in customer trust. An airline cannot survive if its passengers feel disrespected. So the question is not, how much will this cost? But, how much will we lose if we do nothing?" Applause broke out from the back rows, tentative at first, then swelling like a wave. Not from every reporter, but enough to shift the air in the room. Meanwhile, outside, social media erupted. Jasmine Lee's video had passed 10 million views in just 12 hours. The hashtag #FlyWithDignity surged to #1 worldwide on Twitter. Tens of thousands of comments poured in, recounting similar experiences of scrutiny, suspicion, and being removed from paid seats. One tweet spread like wildfire. If the CEO was treated this way, what happens to the rest of us? Skyline Air's stock dipped 2% in the morning, but by afternoon, after Ethan's speech was broadcast live, the graph spiked upward. Investors no longer saw only a company in crisis, but a leader willing to face it and reform. In the press room, Ethan closed with a voice that was deep, slow, and unwavering. I do not want yesterday's flight to be remembered only as a viral scandal. I want it to be remembered as a turning point, so that every passenger, regardless of skin color, nationality, rich or poor, can step onto a plane and know this. Their dignity will be protected. He paused, swept his gaze across the room, and ended with one final line, sharp as a blade etched into memory. We will not just fly to destinations. We will fly with justice. Applause thundered. Flashes flared in a storm of light. In one corner, Jasmine Lee slowly lowered her camera, her heart pounding. She knew this moment would be replayed millions of times. And she, the woman who had captured the truth by chance, was now part of history. Ethan left the podium, striding through the press with unshaken composure. Outside, the New York sky was gray, but in his eyes, it was a new horizon, one where justice would take flight with every journey. Just 3 days after Ethan Wallace's speech, the wave had surged far beyond Skyline Air. The entire airline industry was reeling. CNN played Jasmine Lee's video on repeat. In Europe, the BBC remarked, "A CEO has turned a chaotic flight into an indictment against global prejudice." In Tokyo, the Nikkei wrote, "Skyline Air is not just facing a crisis. They have just birthed a new standard for the service industry." The hashtag #FlyWithDignity still dominated social media. Users on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram poured out their stories. A black doctor in Atlanta wrote, "For 15 years, I've been asked to open my carry on more times than anyone else. Now I know the problem was never me." An Asian American woman in Seattle shared, "My daughter was asked if she was sure she could afford a first-class ticket. Ethan's story shows we are not alone." These accounts connected like shards of glass forming a mirror, revealing a truth. Prejudice was not an accident, it was systemic. While Skyline Air was gaining praise for its willingness to reform, other airlines were drowning in outrage. A week later, a video from Delta went viral. An Arab-American family forced off a plane because other passengers felt unsafe. The father held U.S. citizenship documents, yet they were still escorted out. Rage erupted. The hashtag #GroundDelta appeared, and Delta lost more than $40 million in market value in just 2 days. American Airlines faced accusations of selecting VIP passengers by skin color. A former flight attendant leaked an internal email. "Focus on serving customers who look likely to tip well." The words landed like undeniable evidence. Amid the storm, Skyline Air, ironically, rose as the guiding light. Ethan's speech was shared in business schools, political roundtables, and local churches. People called him a symbol of candor, a leader who did not deflect, did not excuse, but confronted and corrected. In the Manhattan high-rise office, Ethan watched the news stream across a massive screen. The glow of blue light sharpened the resolve in his eyes. Beside him, Chief Financial Officer Margaret Foster reported, "Mr. Wallace, this quarter we're down about 2% in short-term profit due to flight delays and reform implementation, but bookings rose 15% in the past week. People are choosing Skyline because they trust us." Ethan nodded. Trust is the most valuable currency. Lose it, and every number is meaningless. The door opened. Linda Morales, Executive Vice President, entered with a thick folder in hand. "Mr. Wallace, Congress just reached out. They want you to testify about discrimination in the airline industry. This is no longer just Skyline's issue." Ethan was silent for a moment. In his eyes, a flame of resolve burned. "Good. If they want the truth, I will bring it into the light." Meanwhile, Jasmine Lee had become the new face of the movement. From an ordinary passenger, she was suddenly being interviewed by NBC, Fox, and even The Guardian. People called her the woman who captured the moment that changed history. On a live broadcast, the host asked, "Jasmine, why do you think your video spread so quickly?" She looked directly into the camera, her eyes glistening. "Because it is the truth. No one can deny the truth once it has been recorded. Mr. Wallace had the power to stand up, but this video shows that anyone, even a regular passenger, can help change things." Her words were clipped and spread across TikTok, fueling a new hashtag. #RecordTheTruth. Public pressure mounted. Within 2 weeks, the U.S. Department of Transportation launched a multi-agency investigation. A draft of the Airline Passenger Bill of Rights emerged, requiring every airline to transparently store all discrimination complaints, publish annual anti-bias training reports, and face multi-million-dollar fines for repeat offenses. Ethan received an official invitation from the Senate. He knew the moment in seat 2A had ignited a fire that forced an entire system, and now an entire nation, to confront itself. That night, standing alone at the window of Skyline's tower, gazing down at the endless streams of New York traffic, Ethan whispered, "That flight began as a stain, but it will end as a declaration." The city lights reflected his silhouette, no longer just the CEO of an airline, but the emblem of a movement soaring beyond flight paths, reaching across the skies, into every heart that yearned for justice. The capital, Washington, D.C. Morning light streamed across the towering white columns, reflecting on the stone steps where dozens of reporters crowded. A live broadcast carried nationwide. Ethan Wallace, CEO of Skyline Air, was set to testify before Congress. Inside, the Senate chamber was packed. Senators sat in rows, papers stacked, microphones glowing. The air was heavy, tense, as though every gaze was intent on piercing straight into the truth. Ethan entered. A simple charcoal grey suit, a navy tie, polished black leather shoes. He needed no accessories. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. When he sat down, the sound of cameras firing filled the chamber like thunder. Senator James Harrison, known for his conservatism, opened. "Mr. Wallace, thank you for being here. Tell us what truly happened on Flight 447. Ethan raised his head. His voice rang deep and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, that day I was not a CEO. I was simply a black passenger with a first-class ticket. And for that alone, I was doubted, treated as an intruder. I had every document, every right. Yet I was still asked to leave the plane. Not for security, but for prejudice. The words echoed through the chamber. A few senators nodded. The audience behind murmured softly. Ethan continued. I had the power to reverse the situation, but millions of others do not. Every day they are humiliated, pushed to lower seats, stripped of dignity because of how they look. That is not personal failure. That is systemic failure. Senator Maria Alvarez leaned toward her microphone. Mr. Wallace, what solutions do you propose to end this? Ethan opened his case, pulling out a thick file, dropping it firmly on the table. The Airline Passenger Bill of Rights, drafted by the Skyline Air Team. It includes mandatory anti-bias training, transparent reporting systems, severe financial penalties, and a mechanism to allow passengers to file direct complaints on the spot. Harrison frowned. But this will raise costs significantly across the industry. In the end, passengers will pay the price. Are you sure this is the right path? Ethan's eyes burned as he looked directly at him. Which cost is greater, a few million for training or hundreds of millions lost in a crisis of trust? More importantly, which cost is greater than the dignity of a human being? Silence fell. The question hung in the air like a mirror reflecting every face. Outside, the public watched live. In a cafe in Atlanta, black passengers applauded when they heard Ethan speak. In Los Angeles, an Asian American family whispered with tears in their eyes. Finally, someone speaks for us. On Twitter, the hashtag Airline Bill of Rights shot to the top of the trends. Meanwhile, the fates of those who once opposed Ethan became clear. Alan Peterson, the former captain, sat alone in his empty Atlanta apartment. On the table lay a termination letter and a permanent license revocation notice from the FAA. His phone rang, but he dared not answer. The news now called him the most infamous discriminatory pilot in America. 30 years of career vanished in 15 minutes of failure. Olivia Barnes, the veteran flight attendant, sought work at a small suburban hotel. But every response was the same. We cannot hire someone tied to the Skyline scandal. At night, she held her child close, tears streaming as she replayed the moment she threw away her career for a prejudiced glance. Robert Finch, the young attendant, was shunned by friends. He tried entering other service industries, but his name appeared instantly on Google, forever linked with the phrase, first-class injustice. The look from every employer was the same, cold. They all learned the same lesson. Prejudice not only destroys others, it destroys oneself. Back in the hearing, Ethan closed with a slow, deliberate voice. Ladies and gentlemen, the law exists to protect the powerless, not only the powerful. If even I, the CEO of an airline, can be dismissed, then how many nameless passengers are silently suffering? We cannot allow this to continue. It is time to change. The chamber erupted in applause. Even Harrison, once doubtful, gave a slight nod. That day, the draft Airline Passenger Bill of Rights won overwhelming support. Senators from both parties declared, "Justice in the skies will no longer be a slogan, it will be the law." That evening, Ethan returned to his hotel, standing by the window overlooking the lights of Washington. Reflected in the glass, he no longer saw just a CEO. He saw a new symbol, a man who had turned Seat 2A into a battlefield, and from it launched a movement reshaping a nation. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The journey was not over, but today he had taken a giant step forward. 6 months after Flight 447, the world of aviation was no longer the same. The electronic board at JFK flickered with departure updates, but on the TVs mounted in the terminal, the news was no longer about delays or fuel prices. Everything revolved around 3 words: fly with dignity. Congress had passed the Airline Passenger Bill of Rights with overwhelming support. The new law required every airline to record and disclose data on discrimination, with penalties of tens of millions of dollars for repeat violations. Airlines rushed to roll out anti-bias training programs, not because they wanted to, but because they dared not defy the tide of public demand. But that wave did not stop at the skies. In Chicago, a major hotel chain announced a fair check-in policy, promising room assignments strictly based on booking order, not on appearance or ethnicity. In California, a car rental company overhauled its entire class system to prevent black customers from being given older cars. Even major banks faced scrutiny, forced to amend lending practices to eliminate invisible selection. The movement spread like wildfire across a dry forest, and it all began with Seat 2A. At Skyline Air's Manhattan headquarters, Ethan Wallace stood at the massive glass window, overlooking the city ablaze with lights. On his desk lay the latest report. Customer satisfaction up 28%, ticket bookings at the highest level in the company's history. But what made him smile was not the numbers, it was the printed email beside them. Dear Mr. Wallace, I am an ordinary passenger. Last week, when a flight attendant started to re-check my ticket, her colleague stopped her and said, "At Skyline, dignity does not need verification," I cried. "Thank you for changing everything." Ethan folded the paper, his gaze distant. He knew the work would never be easy. But words like these were the fuel that kept him going. Meanwhile, Jasmine Lee, the young woman who had filmed the video, was in her 2nd year at Howard University Law School. She had just started an internship at the Dignity Defense Fund, the organization Ethan founded with $50 million, now grown to $200 million, thanks to massive donations. Its office overflowed with case files, passengers removed from flights for speaking another language, guests denied service at hotels, countless small but painful stories. Jasmine told her colleagues, "The day I raised my phone, I only wanted to record the truth. But I've learned this. When the truth is exposed, it can change an entire system." Her words resonated in the room full of volunteers. They knew they were working not just for an airline, but for the world. At Yale, Professor David Thompson lectured his civil rights law class. Before Skyline, cases of discrimination were often dismissed as personal grievances, too hard to prove. But when technology meets courage, we have evidence that cannot be denied. The Ethan Wallace case is a turning point. From one passenger to a reformer. On the screen behind him, an image of Ethan sitting calmly in Seat 2A appeared. More than 200 students sat in silence. A year later, Ethan took the stage at the National Urban League Conference. 3,000 people packed the hall, applauding thunderously. He raised his hand for quiet, then spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "Change does not begin in boardrooms. It begins in the moment when one person refuses to yield to injustice. I sat down in seat 2A, but I refused to leave, and that refusal created a movement. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Dignity is not a privilege. Respect is not a gift. Justice is not something to be begged for. They are basic rights, non-negotiable. The hall erupted, many rising to their feet, tears streaming. After the event, a little black girl, about 8 years old, clutched her mother's hand and shyly approached. "Mr. Wallace," she whispered, "my mom said you made it safe for us to fly." Ethan knelt to meet her eyes, gently holding her small hand. "You were always safe, little one. The difference now is that the whole world knows it." Her eyes sparkled. In that moment, Ethan knew every effort, every battle, was worth it. Outside, the night sky glowed with the lights of departing planes. The roar of engines echoed like a triumphal anthem. A new flight took off, carrying hundreds of passengers and a message spreading across the globe. Justice may begin with one seat, but it will never end there. Ethan Wallace stood by the window, watching silently. He was no longer just the CEO of Skyline Air. He was the symbol of a movement history would remember. From first class to the human heart. Flight 447 had ended, but the journey of justice had only just begun. In this world, some battles are not fought on battlefields, but in the narrow seats between the skies. Ethan Wallace's battle was not about claiming a seat, but about reclaiming dignity, something that should have always been respected. Flight 447 began as an incident, but ended as a declaration. Justice does not need permission to appear. It only needs one person willing to stand firm. One person willing to say, "I am not going anywhere." And from that moment, an entire system was forced to change. The lesson is not just for the airline industry. It is for all of us. When faced with injustice, you have two choices: remain silent or stand up. And sometimes one act of resolve is enough to spark a wave that changes the world. If you believe dignity should never be bargained, press like to spread this message. If you believe fairness is not a privilege but a birthright, press subscribe to join us for the next stories. And leave a comment with just 2 words: stand tall, stand. Because change always begins with a single choice, the choice to stand firm.